Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time we got a couple questions, starting with this one from Lucas Fan, who asked, "Hey Thor, do you think that the Disney sequel trilogy would have been better if Finn got top billing and became a Jedi instead of Rey? Or do you think it would have been worse off than it already was?" And I know this probably won't be exactly the answer you're looking for, but I honestly think there were numerous, a near infinite number of ways that the sequels could have gone that would have worked far better than what we got. And I don't know that you can just kind of point at what character was or wasn't the main character as the problem, as much as it was just how the characters were used in general that determined success or failure. I mean, I certainly think there's a version, or again, many versions of the trilogy where Rey is the main character, and she's handled fantastically, and she becomes everyone's favorite new character, where she becomes the next big iconic character of Star Wars, and where the trilogy was amazing, and where we're all excited for her movie coming up in a year or two. And despite what some want to say or claim about her never getting a chance or being given a chance by some fans, or how they want to rewrite history to fit a narrative today, there really wasn't all that much hate for Rey at all before the movies came out or going into the trilogy. There was actually virtually none, no negativity towards Daisy Ridley or the character when you really go back and take a look. And as I've tried to point out before, the problem with Rey is that she was heralded to be, before Episode 7 even came out, to be this big, important feminist icon, essentially. For some in the media, and yeah, at Lucasfilm too, it wasn't if she was going to become a great character and be warmly accepted by the fans. She was a great character simply for existing in what so many want to think of as a male-dominated franchise, even though we all know there's been many great female characters in Star Wars. I've even done videos before where I've shown some of these articles that came out, again before The Force Awakens did, about, again, what Rey was being proclaimed as or was going to be before the film came out. How important she was going to be regardless of anything and everything else, like how good the character would actually be or the film would be. And then how, after the movie came out, anything less than full acceptance of this character was seen as a complete rejection not just of Rey, but of the idea of a female lead in Star Wars. It just took some people saying, you know, maybe she's not the best character ever, and she seems to be really good at stuff without any training, almost a little Mary Sue-like, you could say. That's really all it took to start this whole idea that many Star Wars fans are sexist and won't accept women in the franchise. It was then and there that all started. Anyway, my point is simply that the trilogy could have worked just fine, been fantastic even with Rey as the main character if she was just handled better. It wasn't that choice of Rey or Daisy Ridley that damned the trilogy, and things could have been just as poorly or gone just as poorly with Finn in the more lead role, as it could have been fantastic with Finn in the lead role, depending on, again, many different things. Though of course they weren't a big fan of making Finn the lead either, or John Boyega, because China wouldn't exactly have been a fan of that, hence why he was shrunk down on the Force Awakens poster over there. Now, all that said, when you look at the trilogy we did get, do I think kind of keeping it more or less the same, could it or would it have worked better with Finn being the main character, or a more prominent character at least, or more prominent throughout the trilogy, since he was, I'd argue, a main character in The Force Awakens, before he kind of got side-quested in The Last Jedi, where it was pretty clear that Rian Johnson just didn't know or care what to do with him, and that any ideas of him becoming a Jedi, which, yeah, there does seem to be alluded to in The Force Awakens, before that was all just completely thrown away. And yeah, I think it could have been interesting to have Finn and Rey both become Jedi, or kind of be co-main characters, and to have them on this sort of parallel journey where they're both looking for belonging, but kind of going in different or opposite directions until maybe the very end, where you start by having Rey be the one we all think is going to be a hero, who seems rather altruistic in that first movie, like she's a good person just because she is a good person, and she is selfless, and she's heard all these stories about Luke and the Jedi growing up, and she just wants to become one. She just wants to make a difference in the galaxy and be good. But as the trilogy goes on, all this power she has kind of keeps tempting her. The quick and easy path tempts her. Maybe what Kylo has done to Han and done to her friend Finn also shows her that sometimes you can't just be good, you have to actually strike back against evil. And then you also have Kylo and the dark side playing a factor on her as well. I would have it where, in Episode 8, she still goes off to save Kylo, but in all reality, it's about finding her true self and embracing what she really wants, and she ends up joining him. And you could still make her the daughter or granddaughter of Palpatine if you really want to. That could have been worked into the story quite well and set up or hinted at early on, and then I think it just makes more sense when it gets revealed in 9. Though I'm not saying you have to bring Palpatine himself back or anything like that. You keep him dead for sure. Just make all this power she has, or that awoke in her in that first movie, what The Force Awakens really means, is somehow the dark side awoke in her. And she was not strong enough to fight it alone, and in the end she gets help from Finn. He is the one who kind of brings her back from Kylo after being the one who starts off with Kylo. And what I mean by that is we could of course have Finn starting off as a First Order stormtrooper, and a rather impressive and very loyal one. I have suggested before kind of eliminating the role of Captain Phasma and just turning Finn into that. Having him be the commander of Kylo's personal special squad of troopers or whatever. And at some point early on, Finn has the Force awaken in him too. He has a moment where he realizes he is Force sensitive, he has the same kind of powers that Rey does, and he refuses to kill a prisoner he's been ordered to kill by Kylo himself. And you could have that be Poe, I suppose. You can keep all that between those two. I think the friendship between those two worked really well, especially in The Force Awakens. And so they escape together, and Finn spends the trilogy trying to get over this programming or this brainwashing, trying to get over the dark side he feels is naturally a part of him because of the time he spent with Kylo, and now he has this power too, and he understands how power can be exploited or used for the wrong reasons. He has, of course, seen it. And ultimately, in the end, especially after Rey turns to the dark side, he joins with Luke, and Luke teaches him how to be a Jedi, and they save Rey in the end, and everybody's happy except for Kylo, who I would probably kill off in the end. I don't know, I'm just kind of throwing out some ideas there. I have wanted to, for a while now, go back and do a redoing of the sequel trilogy. Maybe I'll do that finally. But either way, yes, I do think that Finn getting a much bigger role could have worked and worked really well. I think John Boyega is a fine actor. I think he was one of the biggest wasted potentials in those films. But I wouldn't say that not having Finn be the lead and having Rey be the lead was what went wrong in the first place. There were, again, many, many different ways you could have done the sequel trilogies, and they could have been great movies. Alright, now on to this question from Plush Bro, who asked, "Hey Thor, with Skeleton Crew, the next Mando-verse show coming up soon, I figured this is a good time to ask this question. I see a lot of fear with the Mando-verse era leading up to the sequels, so I'm curious if you were in charge, how would you structure the Mando-verse in a way that satisfies both sequel haters and the few enjoyers? Sadly, this era seems like the only salvageable part of live-action Star Wars at the moment, and I would hate to see it go from phenomenal like the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian were, to some boring First Order origin story." And I think that is a difficult thing to do, to make both sides of the sequel debate happy with what they do with the Mando-verse. And so what I would try to do, and yes, I am someone who wasn't a big fan of the sequels, but I'd try to make the Mando-verse, what they're doing with it right now, or where it ultimately will go, I would try to make it as independent from the sequels as possible. I'd try to make it as good as it can be on its own. I would focus pretty much entirely on Thrawn and show him not trying to set up a First Order one day down the road or anything like that. Instead, he is truly trying to revive the Empire in all its former glory right here and right now, and for whatever reason he's doing that. In other words, I would have it where the First Order is something that ultimately comes about, not as an afterthought necessarily, but it's never part of the plan. The plan is the Empire to be reborn, and the eventual defeat of Thrawn changes that. And I would make sure he has one hell of an impressive run before he is defeated. I want to see him, I want to see Thrawn get some real wins, and where the Imperial Remnant pushes the New Republic to the brink of defeat. And some way, somehow, I'd have our heroes of old. I would have the original trilogy heroes, Han, Luke, Leia, Lando, Chewie. Bring them all back, and I'd have them be a big part of the eventual victory, and give them all a new sort of happy ending, essentially. Now, I don't know how you pull that off in terms of logistics. Do you recast them all, or do you try to use AI, or what do you do to bring them back? But I think just letting them all get a win, bringing them together for a hard-fought win over a great opponent like Thrawn, assuming they can write him well, I think that goes a long way to just making everybody happy, no matter what you thought of the sequels or not. Though I do think you have to do it without implying or inserting cracks in the original heroes, if you will, where you're not trying to in any way allude to why things are going to go wrong with them later on. Don't do anything like trying to show Luke training Ben and starting to wonder about this darkness in him and what he's going to do about it. Just leave all of that stuff alone, or leave it for later on. And for those who like the sequels and want to get into that later on, let there be another sort of story or mini time period between the Mando-verse and then the sequels that takes us to the sequels. And I think if you do it that way, if you make all the sequel-related stuff come after the Mando-verse, like again, making the First Order more comes about by default after the defeat of the Remnant, not like they're setting up this big plan with Palpatine and all that. You can do that later on. But I think if you do it that way, people who didn't like the sequels can just make this their sort of new sequel trilogy. Or they can have this be in their headcanon as the sequels. They can say this is where and how the story of the original trilogy characters ends for them, and to not care about the stories that come next that will ultimately lead up to the sequels. Basically, again, I think the best bet with the Mando-verse is to really just make it its own thing as much as you can. Let it stand on its own and don't try to hint at things down the road, be that with Luke or the First Order, Han and Leia, whatever it might be. Just don't do it. Just let it be its own thing. Let people enjoy it for what it is. Well, that's all I got for this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about any of this. How would you answer these questions? Or you could always ask a question for a future lightning response video. All you got to do is start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. But whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.